All right, we are recording. Hello everyone, and welcome to this DRep Code of Conduct online workshop. I'm not going to be doing too much of the talking in this session. Øystein's going to be doing most of the talking, and we'll also hear a little bit from Jose, who hosted a workshop in Colombia, Adam, who hosted a workshop in Indianapolis, and I believe also from Eco, who hosted a workshop in Ghana. And of course, Øystein will cover the Oslo workshop. And other than that, we'll be going through a little bit more of what we've been doing for the past 2 years, the entire history of the DRep Code of Conduct. Go ahead, Øystein. I'm just going to mute myself and enjoy the show.
Okay. So during all of this, like, if there's any questions, feel free to raise a hand. We'll try to time it, but what we're trying to do first is like give some background information to why we are where we are at currently, and that might be helpful when we then look at the current code of conduct. Apart from what Thomas just said, like there's one more person, and it's Yuta, who actually started all of this process 2 years ago, and that's Yuko Ishu, his name, and Yuta is nickname, and he's done an amazing job as well. And he has been from the Japan community, and they had I think they had even 2 workshops in Japan. So yeah. But yeah, let's start with an introduction about how we are where we are now, and we will go through the timeline of the code of conduct, the workshop series, some planned workshops, because even the Catalyst project ended, we are planning to do more. Some summary of the feedback we have currently, and background for the current version, and what's the current state, and then goals for this rest of this online workshop. So actually, this process of a code of conduct, it started back in November 2022. Yuta proposed an initial code of conduct for the Catalyst DReps at the time on the Cardano forums. And this code of conduct was something he invited online reviewers of. I and many others who are here today actually were part of reviewing that. For example, I know Felix was part of reviewing that. And that code of conduct was the basis that was going to be part of the Catalyst DRep. That took some time. And we all know that currently on Catalyst, the status of the DRep, it's going to be workshops on that. So that's something that's still to be, all of the details of it to be clarified. But for us, that's then made us realize that after a SIP process, we needed to have something similar for the SIP 1694 delegated representative. So we started a proposal in October 2023, and that has been a series of workshops, and we'll see that in the next slide. But basically has ended with now a code of conduct version 2.0. That's currently both trying to encompass both the Catalyst DRep, so bringing all of that history from the original work of Yuta, and then now also the SIP 1694 DRep as well. So I can start with a bit about the Norway workshop. We held a workshop in 20th of January. And it was, how many attendance did you have, Thomas? Was it 14 or 15? I think something like that.
We had 15.
15, yeah. And during this workshop series, like we did not only talk about the code of conduct, but it was also about like training and recruitment for the DReps. but one part of it was also about this code of conduct segment. And some of the highlights we had from that workshop was, let me see some notes here. We wonder about how to make certifications for competence, because we believe that delegate representatives need to have some form of competence to be able to vote efficiently. We actually discussed some interesting ideas about social endorsement and even like community notes, well, quite popular lately with Justin's community notes in Twitter. And we also saw that the need for, like, when there will be organizations, some form of lobbying rules. And I think like all of the different workshops had like feedback on also like organizations and interests. So this is why we'll see also when we come to the actual code of conduct that we now have a part that's called like interests and alliances. The picture you see there is from Jose and one in Colombia. But I would like also for to shortly give an impression from Ghana. So maybe if Eco can say just a few words, like don't need to have a long speech about it, but the workshop in Ghana.
All right, guys. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Good evening once again. So, in regards to the workshop in Ghana, we held ours on the 27th of January 2024, and it was a collaborative event that brought together about 18 participants, which had diverse backgrounds and experts in like decentralized technology space. The workshop was also aimed to formulate a comprehensive code of conduct for DReps, hence ensuring the ethical and responsible practices within the ecosystem. So, as mentioned previously by Sir Einstein, the workshop comprised about 5 key topics, and each fostering from them. Each of them, there is a discussion on various aspects of the DReps, and these included like motivations for becoming a DRep, streamlining the DRep registration process, and a dive into the code of conduct itself. That's what we seek to discuss today, tackling DRep branding and also innovation in DRep tooling. And the participants engage in some discussions and sharing ideas and perspective. And there were 2 major takeaways at the end of the workshop. The first was that workshops like these should be done frequently, because these are like platforms where individuals are given the opportunity to voice their thoughts and also contribute their quota, especially in the governance within the ecosystem. And the other one was that the participants agreed was that relatives in the various regions should also be considered when crafting the code of conduct, as relatives can differ. So probably what happens in Africa could definitely be different from what happens somewhere in Norway or Colombia or Japan or US, or name it. So that's a bit of what happened in Ghana on the 27th of January this year. So thank you very much. Instead.
Yeah, Adam, do you want to say a bit about Indianapolis?
Sure, absolutely. So greetings, good afternoon from the Midwest US. We had a great workshop in Indianapolis, 16 people at the main workshop, a couple more who came for other events like the night before, that evening after. And yeah, we covered all the same stuff. I'd say that some of the things that kind of topics that I found interesting that were, I think, maybe unique to us, we had a lot of good discussions about what it looks like to be a group DRep. So if you have a group of people who want to, pool their knowledge and share their resources to serve as a DRep together, what that would look like, not just from a technical standpoint of creating a script to cast the DRep vote and the way that people might vote on it, but also like what kind of accountability you might have, like what kind of a charter do you need to have for your group? How do you allow people to, voice their difference of opinion from the rest of the panel if they are, like a minority vote, and the majority of the panel moves forward? And how do you sort of like make sure you are transparent with your delegators that maybe the person that they feel closest to was overruled, and the DRep is going to vote a certain way? How do you make sure that they feel like it's at least a just process and a legitimate process, even if the vote isn't specifically what they would want to happen? Along with that, we also just sort of did talk a lot about the influence, and the biggest thing that we thought was we need to have standards of accountability and standards of disclosure. Our thinking was that a lot of this is are things that we can't control when it goes on chain. Things, and I should say things that it would be more disastrous to try to control by having some centralized feature than it would be to make it technically possible to happen. So like sort of one example would be we might all agree that it is morally wrong for someone to be paid to vote, to like sell their vote and say, hey, if somebody pays me this much ADA, I will vote a certain way on a proposal. But is it morally wrong for someone to say like, hey, I'm being hired by a company in the Cardano ecosystem, or I'm being hired by, let's say, Binance to do all the research and then cast my vote, and Binance expects me to do the research of what is best for Binance and cast votes for what is best for Binance, and I'm a paid researcher? That's a little bit more ambiguous. So the biggest thing is just sort of like having standards of disclosure, so that if anybody does try to hide like who they're in alliance with, or what what kind of organizations they're part of, or who they're being compensated by to do anything like research or voting, that be made public, so that people would decide whether or not to delegate to them. And then if it comes out that somebody wasn't honest, everybody's on the same page and says, I disclosed what I did. Why didn't you disclose what you did? So yeah, that was pretty much it.
I think it's 4 a.m. in Japan as well, so probably that's why Yuta couldn't make it yet. But I've reviewed some of the notes from the series of workshops in Japan, as well as the Eastern Town Hall, and they have done an amazing job. They also highlight this disclosure, and they also had an interesting viewpoint in this, like in your disclosure, you should also provide where you can give feedback to actually update the code of conduct and update how often you will review your disclosure, because things change. People in organizations are different. People in a group collaborating will change over time. So that aspect is very valuable as well. And yeah, I really want to give a shout out to the Japanese community for all of their feedback. As you will see later in this presentation, they have had a lot of feedback. But then let's move over to Colombia, and Jose, maybe you can give a few words.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are. I'm currently based in warm and sunny Colombia today. We held a workshop about a month ago on February 24th. And we aimed for a slightly different approach of having only Cardano community invites. So we did invite, of course, people from the Cardano community, SPOs, developers, builders. We had investors. We had all sort of the people from the ecosystem in Colombia, but as well, we did invite academics and experts in politics, in constitutional law, in politics strategy, in corporate governance, and we even had a philosopher there to enrich in the conversation. So we had quite a rich conversation. We, of course, went over many of the same topics that other workshops went over. A very strong emphasis on disclosure, of course, and transparency being the key to any ethical considerations for the DRep role. We emphasized on disclosing identity, the possible alliances that a DRep might have with other SPOs, with constitutional committees members, part of a larger political group. We also talked about representation. So what is it that you stand for? What are your ideas? If you are representing an industry, maybe you're part of a guild of an industry, whether that's DeFi or NFTs or music builders, whatever it is. Also groups, maybe geographical representation, political, economic interests or so. We also thought that it would be important for DReps to disclose what their decision-making process and rationale is. So how is it that they come to their decisions? And not only explain what the theory is, but how it would be for each and every decision, they should be publishing that. So who did they consult? If it's a collective DRep, who participated, who said what, and full transparency would be the best way to go. If they are funded by anyone other than the potential rewards that might be given for the DRep role, and any potential conflicts of interest as well. Other than that, having that group of people that I just mentioned before brought us the nitty-gritty of the real-world public policy and politics. So not to extend too much, the conclusion to which we came is that high-power incentives are almost always the source of unforeseen trick behaviors or bad behaviors to trick the system. Any incentive framework should preferably have more subtle and more soft incentives, so not huge opportunities on one decision being able to profit anyone in a too big of a way. We did have many examples that I will not share here and at this moment, but of how power incentives have produced not only corruption, but has eventually led to huge violence streaks in Colombia. So that was one of the conclusions, is pay attention a lot to the incentive structure so that no huge rewards can be attained by bad behavior, because that they will just justify funding such bad behaviors, and big efforts will result in conflicted behaviors. So that was pretty much it. A lot of course, more if you want to go to a report that we published on Cardano Forum. It is public, and you can go see it. And of course, I'm available for any further questions that anyone might have. Thank you.
That's awesome. And apart from this, we also had continuously a feedback form on the delegate representative code of conduct document where people could report in, and people are also able to comment as well. And you can actually track all of those comments in the document as well. And you can see how it grew. It was 40 pages at one point, and now it's down to, I believe, 14 pages. And you can follow everything is transparent, and you can follow all of it. And all of the workshops has a forum post, and there's also one document with all of the feedback gathered that everyone can review as well. Yeah, let's move on. This is supposed to be like a closeout for the Catalyst part of this project. So Catalyst founded this during Phone 10. But we are actually going to continue with other workshops as well. Thomas might share a bit of details on that, but we are planning a series now in Builderfest in France, and then also in England, and then also in Las Vegas, I believe. We also are offering all of the material we have used. For example, in Norway, we had a presentation material, and we let everyone use this material for other workshops. I believe there's going to be a workshop in Korea with Oscar. And also, I believe Alex from the LATAM community is going to hold a workshop series as well. And why is this important? Because if you look at all of the work we did with the SIP 1694, it was like 50+ workshop, 1,000 attendance. We are like at 1/10 of that currently. And what we have seen from the feedback so far is this is something we will actually also need to experience as a community and then evolve as well. So We definitely don't think it's the end with the end of the funding of this project, and the people behind it are very passionate about it, and we want to help and make sure we evolve this. And in that end, we're actually planning to make this part of a GitHub repository with Intersect, if for the working group there, if they will let us, and I already suggested that, and to keep working on this. And we actually even proposed that as part of your disclosure, you should also link to the document and then have feedback. So even when this is live on mainnet and on SunshineNet, like we will keep it an ongoing process where it will evolve naturally. Yeah. So for the feedback, just like a very broad overview of all of this, we had 139 feedback items that we recorded. We have tried to reflect 107 of them. Some of the reasons why we could not reflect all of them is because the technology is not yet there, or in some cases it was quite non-specific what the feedback was. It was like, oh, this looks good. There's not an actionable item on that. But from the general feedback, we had quite a large portion, 56, and actually many of the feedback were on actually separating the DRep and the Catalyst DRep and the SIP 1694 DRep again, because at one point in version 1.0 we believe that these are so similar role that we actually made them one. And we did that also to try to simplify the document. But the feedback from many was that we believe that it will be a different volume of governance actions. In Catalyst, with the treasuries, you are looking at a lot of different reviews and potential votes, and it's in cycles that's potentially faster. So for some of those reasons, we have decided to take on that feedback, and we are now separated them again into two different code of conduct segments of the code of conduct, one for the Catalyst DRep and one for the SIP 1694 DRep. Apart from that, many were on disclosures related to interests and alliances, and also many were on disclosures on competence and resources, and also actually on disclosures for voting procedures. So because of all this feedback on disclosures, we actually now focus on both a disclosure but also a disclosure process. So how to update and keep your DRep disclosure up to date as well. So you'll see that in the current version. Some were on defining DReps, and some were on we call it identity issues, but it was I would say most of them are related to potential Sybil attacks, where you pose as being one DRep, but you are actually holding multiple DReps, and you will have like effective collusion where you're not being public about all of your voting power and what your influence is in the system. And 4 were related to constitution items. So in regards to constitution, we are still waiting on the final interim constitution and all of the feedback there, but we do have a plan to update the code of conduct to also try to see if it relates to the constitution, and if some of the values in the constitution is something we need to uphold for delegated representatives, and how that should be part of the ethical conduct of delegated representatives. To give you an overview of the feedback, we will provide a link to this, but we created a summary document. I think I need to share the here. So it's an Excel document where we have the different feedbacks, and we link to them and we categorize them. And Yuta has done an amazing job. He also translated to Japanese. We might need to have some translation process for the code of conduct itself after this process is done, because we want to make it available in many languages. But as you can see, it was quite a lot of feedback that we needed to think about. And for every feedback item, we also had to say if it's already reflected in the document, if not, why, and then we also categorized it what type of feedback it is as well. So yeah, that brings us to like the background for this, and before we move on to the actual code of conduct. So we realized that a big, huge code of conduct is not something that people will use. You need to homogenize the core principles, and that is also why we have like a preamble. It's more a focus on the values we're trying to uphold, and we are also trying to not limit or constrain DReps too much. We want it to be what are the minimal that you need to do to disclose to have an effective governance as well. During version 1, it was streamlined into 3 categories. It was related to competence, organization, and fairness. And we, as I said earlier, we had the Catalyst DRep code of conduct together with the SIP DRep code of conduct. We then evolved organization based on all of the feedback rounds from the workshop. So we felt that organizational feedback had a lot of feedback on actually disclosing your interest and what alliances you had. And we added also a general voting process and identity, and we feel those two encompass what we before called fairness, because it's very hard to judge, for example, like if you're doing arbitrary voting or some form of unfair voting process that's not effective for the governance and not good for the ecosystem as a whole. But what you can judge is what you have disclosed in advance on how you plan to vote, because then you can be held accountable to that. And if you don't have a disclosure of how you plan to vote, then the community can decide if we should delegate our voting power to such a delegated representative. So that's the reason for the removal of fairness, because it's hard to measure, and then to add this voting process in particular as a way to disclose and try to handle that issue. And as I mentioned earlier, we also decided to split back again. So now we have a segment for Catalyst and the SIP DRep. Yeah, and one of the things we will look for feedback on during this session is what could be the minimum standards to follow, because you as a DRep who decide to do this disclosure, you can disclose as much as you want, but we want to try to at least have like a minimum standard that everyone is held to. And if you don't have that standard, and we give examples of what we feel is the minimum standard currently, but we want also your feedback on if that is sufficient. Yeah. So the current state is that we are realizing that what is most aligned with the on-chain activity, like what you can do on SanchoNet and what you could do on mainnet later, is actually going to be doing disclosures, because this is something that you can read on the blockchain. So you will have what's called like a voting anchor and a DRep anchor, where you can add like a metadata link, and this metadata link could have data on your disclosure. So we feel that a code of conduct that also encompasses data that's hard to measure on the blockchain will not be very effective in being an enforceable code of conduct. Maybe in the future when we have well-established organizations for this, but for now, we really focused on disclosing in a public metadata document, and that's why the code of conduct will have a lot of disclosure items. So yeah, the idea is also that this disclosure item includes the code of conduct, and that it could be something you also disclose when you last updated it, and also what version you are using of the code of conduct. Yeah, we plan to also go through the master document of the code of conduct now, and the goal of this workshop session is to see that there's no outstanding issues with the current version, that there's not something critical that should stop us from actually trying to use this on, for example, SanchoNet now, and actually trying to practice this and making it something that you don't only have the theory about, but actually try it out with data on how it works, and if it's something that gives value to delegators of the delegated representatives. And as I said previously, we are also interested in if you have established sufficient minimum requirements for disclosure, and if we give DReps sufficient freedom to express how they want to express themselves. So we are trying to balance this act of you have to, if you want to say that you are a part of the code of conduct, you have to have these minimum standards you follow. But we also don't want to, for example, limit you from or having an organization or having us being a single DRep or just focusing on some specific knowledge tasks. Like, we want to make sure that we also don't limit the creativity. So this is also why we have only as few items as we think is critical for having effective governance. Yeah. So before we move on to the actual document, is there any questions on the background and history that we went through now so far? Or if anyone wants to add something to this from the team? Let's have a quick round on that.
Wait, did you say add something to the meeting?
No, I just asked if anyone wants to have any more questions on the background of where we are now in the code of conduct and the history of how we got here so far, before we move on to the looking at the document itself.
The only question maybe is, where is the central repository, if there is one, for all of this, all of the outputs and assets that came out of the getting to this point?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's so far it's mostly like documents, like Word documents in Google Drive. But what we have talked about is like adding it to Intersect GitHub repository and for the DRep working group, and trying to evolve it from there, because as I try to present, like, we have just 5 working group, 100 people. I feel this is just like a start of something, and we should not stop that work at the current point. We'll actually evolve it from here. So I will try to work for that, and that we have it in a GitHub repository. All right, let's move on to the code of conduct itself. Okay. So we will focus on first the preamble and then also on the current standard. We try to actually make it a single page because we believe, again, that if this is going to be something that's used by people, it needs to be digestible, and it needs to be consistent and not too much information. And I also have an example of a current disclosure. I tried to sign up on SanchoNet GovTools and doing a disclosure there. So yeah, but as we develop this document, we hope to include any constitutional values that's related to delegate representatives. And that's why also when we have made disclosures, we focus on not any hard rules, but more like what are we trying to achieve? What's the value behind this? And in general, we have tried to focus on what creates both effective, so in time, like how fast you do governance, but also like the actually creating good results. So for example, that is why we focus on DReps having a minimum of competence and resources, because we believe that will create better voting results, and it's better for the blockchain in general. And wherever we had a choice, like should we have this rule or not, and if it's not really needed, we decided to err on the side of freedom. I will give one example. Is we currently do not say anything in the if it should be allowed to have some form of voting markets or not. We only say that you should disclose what's your policy in this regard. So we don't try to take stances on some of these issues before they are debated fully in the community, but we acknowledge them, and we also say that you should disclose them, because then it means that you as a delegated to a delegated representative will know where this DRep stands in this issue. And then you can make a choice if you want to delegate your voting power to that or not. This one is quite debated internally as well, if it should be something that's obligatory or not. One of the things we are trying to look into is if the code of conduct could be part of the DRep Pioneer program, and maybe even you could have some form of certificate that you have done some training on the code of conduct. But as a permissionless system, we believe that you should be able to have the choice if you want to opt in on this. And it's just the same as when SPOs decide if they want to disclose if they are a single pool operator, what alliances they are in. This is not something you can enforce on the blockchain. It has to be voluntarily. So we saw the power of social contract on when it comes to staking pools. For example, if a staking pool produces double the blocks from two validators at the same time, you are currently being broadcasted on some of the web pages, and that has shown to be a very effective stop of doing that. And we believe that the code of conduct could function as the same type of process. When you disclose all of these items, you will actually then be held accountable, and if you are not following what you say you're following, you could be in problem in terms of voting power in the long run. Okay.
And one of the things I wanted to mention is, what we especially talked about in Indianapolis, I think, trying to have this as a requirement has its own drawbacks, because if you try to have this as a requirement, you're having to add a point of centralization in the system. So you're going to have somebody check it. You're going to have somebody enforce it. And no matter if you have that be a committee or whatever, it still means that it's less permissionless, and the damage of making it less permissionless is, in a lot of people's views, greater than the possible abuses that could come from people not opting to use it. So it's better to have this as a carrot than a stick.
And this is very much in line with the Cardano ethos. We don't have slashing for SPOs who behave badly. We reward them for behaving good, and it could be the same with the DRep. So let's get into the meat of it. I want to go line by line and then see if anyone have any feedback or. And what we're trying to see here is if really are we missing something that crucially should have been there, or do you strongly disagree with this approach we have taken? Do you see any problems with it? But also, do you see any benefits from it? So please don't only criticize, but also if you see that this is something that could work, because in the end, if this is going to be valuable, it has to be something that the community adopts. So it's up to us also to show the value of adopting this code of conduct. We have a large segment on disclosure informations, and the broad part of it, it's 4 different disclosures. So competence, and that's defined into knowledge, ability, and resources. Then identity, and then interests and alliances, and then on the voting process itself. Then we have a step in the code of conduct that says something of how to update your disclosure information. we feel this is crucial as well. It's not enough to just disclose. You have to actually keep it current. And we actually then believe that for a code of conduct to be a valuable document over time, you actually need to define in the code of conduct how you will update it, and that should be part of everyone's disclosure of doing it. And finally, we also believe that some items should be acknowledged, like, for example, the community code of conduct of the Cardano Foundation. Like, just be in general how you talk and how you present yourself. This is something that you can opt into doing, but like the language and how you write about in the code of conduct should follow those community code of conduct as well. So, for example, you do not harass someone and add that to your code of conduct. And say, for example, that you follow this, but these and these people are not following this code of conduct. So let's start with the first item. Competence. Have the knowledge and the ability to cast a vote. That should probably, and what some of we discussed, you could, for example, reference a certificate that you have done a tutorial on how to use Gov tools and how to do this through Cardano CLI, or you can actually reference some of your previous votes, for example. And then what areas do you have knowledge and ability? So we picture that if you're a single DRep, it's probably not likely that you have an area of expertise in all of the voting parameters. So, for example, protocol parameters, if they're economic or network parameters, do you have ability to vote on them? If not, how do you plan on having a gathering of expertise to be able to form an opinion in it? Because it's actually damaging to the protocol if someone votes on, for example, something related to a security parameter, and if that person doesn't understand what they are voting on and have delegated voted power to that. So this is something we want to encourage the opposite of, and try to encourage through disclosures to have competence on what you're voting on. Is there any feedback on this? Or maybe someone else from the team wants to add to that item? If not, I will move on. And another important thing we see, we saw this actually during Catalyst, is just the sheer number of votes. We don't know yet how this will look like in mainnet, because, for example, the deposits will potentially limit the number of governance actions. If you have to have a high deposits to initiate a governance action, there might not be that many. But as a minimum, you should have a disclosure of what do you believe you will set aside of time for reading through proposals and doing that individually as a team, and what are your resources available to consider voting on governance actions. We see this through Catalyst, like people are posting on Twitter with their what they have considered, and even saying like oh, this took them 2 to 3 days. So I think definitely it's going to be part of what is needed to disclose, is to disclose also that you're able to commit to some hours, and you can be held accountable to that as well. Maybe that's not so problematic, but if anyone has any comments on that or not, or else we'll move to the next one. Okay. This one is really hard. The SIP 1694 is quite, what should you say? It says that it recommends that you have some form of identity disclosure, but there's nothing on the chain that forces you currently to do this. But we believe that it's quite important for not having Sybil attacks to have an identity. So as a minimum, you should have some form of contact information. This in itself is also important for just having effective governance and being able to reach out to your DRep. And you could, for example, use ADA mail to do this. And you should also disclose a platform you're active on and where you can be reached. So if it's Twitter or something else like that. We could see this evolve. Like, we hope to collaborate with tools and see if we could recommend some form of DID issuing and some verifiable credentials from those DIDs. And some form of disclosure that you're able to verify. So maybe in the future, the code of conduct could be updated with this as well. I could probably also show like some of the reasons we wanted to have this is actually some form of risk. So we had a risk assessment on this. Like you could have widespread Sybil behavior from DReps if you don't have some form of identity disclosure. You could actually even have regulation risk with disclosure. So that's why we balanced it. And you are not held accountable if you can just make new identities. Like, you can cause a lot of damage, and still, if you have a very effective marketing methods or resources, then it's a problem if you don't have some form of identity disclosure. Yeah. So apart from identity, we also have interests and alliances. Before, we call this like organizational disclosures. But it is important, like, let's say, for example, if Intersex has a DRep or NADA has a DRep, like, I, as a delegator, would be interested in any conflict of interest of this organization. I would be interested in how do this organization have like a voting method internally for deciding what they will vote on the SIP or on the mainnet, I mean, on a governance section. And as a minimum, if you are, we think that any like close relations should be disclosed if you will receive some form of income. And the same, including if you have companies that will benefit from your voting decision. And you should articulate your voting policy internally in your organization or your alliance or your interest group as well. So we don't pick side if it's a DAO or if an organization or if it's just a team of people. This is why we call it interests and alliances now. We also think that if you are going to allow influence on your vote, like how delegators could influence how you will vote as a DRep, you should actually disclose this. We call this disclosing lobbying rules. Like, what are your terms? So, for example, you could have a DRep who's having an online poll. What am I going to vote on this topic? I don't know myself, and asking his DReps. Well, if that's your method, you should disclose this. You should know as a delegator to someone, DRep, how will they actually make a decision and disclose these rules for that. And the same will be if you're an organization and you will accept some form of resources or something like that for influencing how you plan to vote. Yeah, and finally, the voting process. The voting process should, as a minimum, disclose like what are you planning to cover with your votes. Let's say you, in your competence disclosure, you disclose that you are not feeling comfortable with voting on network parameters. Okay, maybe your voting coverage doesn't include that. Do you plan to vote on a special interest group? Maybe you represent the DeFi community or something like that. Okay, then that's maybe part of what's your voting coverage, every topic related to DeFi. But for a delegator, it makes sense that you disclose this. And what's your policy on voting decisions? So are you planning to uphold yourself to the Constitution? And keep in mind that in SIP 1694, anything that's unconstitutional will be voted down by the Constitutional Committee. But what you should disclose is like how you plan to judge if what's your skill and ability to judge if this you're voting on it's within the Constitution. And how are you planning to use experts on topics? If you have a wide voting coverage, are you planning to consult with some experts on how to do network parameters, for example? And yeah, those are the main things with the voting process, to actually disclose what is your process for voting, so you as the delegator are able to judge this. And then we have the how to update, so the frequency. So for example, if it's once every 3 months, how you plan to disclose in advance how you're voting. Are you going to give your delegators information? These and these topics I'm planning to vote yes to, and these topics I'm planning to vote no on, for example. And then how would you notify your delegators? So if it's through your platform, or if you have a website, or your organization, to your members of your organization, and so on. And then for the code of conduct itself, to have a link and a feedback form, and have a process in place to see if that feedback led to improvement or it was rejected, as we have shown in examples of our own gathering of feedback. So you as an organization should also try to see that you're upholding the code of conduct and giving disclosure if you are needing to change something in your disclosure. Yeah, that's pretty much the general gist of it. Apart from that, like, we will work later on these constitutional guardrails, but we are waiting for more public info. But we want to make sure that DReps uphold and in the code of conduct uphold the standards of the Constitution, because if not, then they will just be voted down and it will be an unconstitutional governance action. And we had, during all of this process, we identified some risks that we wanted to cover in the code of conduct. I mentioned a few of them already, but just the fact that you have like operational, you have keys as a DRep, and you will have a lot of vote power delegated to you, means that part of the knowledge of being able to vote and having some form of certificate, this should actually include like some basic security elements and how to treat your keys and how to make sure those are secure. And yeah, and the same, if we had a governance system that had tons of DReps who did not have knowledge on topics, that would be a disaster to our governance system. So having some form of knowledge and educational to this, for example, DRep Pioneer program, seems very important. And the same with the technical knowledge. So having the knowledge to understand security parameters and understanding the reports of the experts on this. They don't need to be expert themselves, but they need to have sufficient technical knowledge. And then if we create a governance system that overwhelms the DReps, then we have a problem. So it's both a problem of filtering, but it's also a problem of resources. So some of the things we discussed internally was like incentivizing DReps and believing this will be important. And we can easily see that this would create several hours a week of work for DReps. But having some form of disclosure of your resources, that reduces the risk of it not being DReps with enough time on their hands, because you as a delegator could then at least choose the DReps that's willing to commit the time. But we hope also incentives will help with this as well. Yeah, and the Sybil, we covered those earlier. So I'll just skip those. So also DAOs and organizations, how they internally handle the voting. For example, if they have some form of token inside the DAO that they use for internal voting and then for the final vote to the mainnet of Cardano. So in general, like you should disclose how you plan to do this voting process. Yeah, and one of the things that we really need to avoid is what we call like powerful voter collusions. So what you get if you see a lot of, and we saw this, for example, on Catalyst, there's an article about it where after the heavy no voting, many were actually like feeling like this is useless. And this is what we call like voter fatigue, because they felt that there was so much heavy voting against them collaborating in some form. So again, you help this by making sure that you disclose whatever interests and alliances you are in, so that you as a delegator are able to choose wisely. And yeah, like the fairness by, for example, having DReps that just randomly votes, you hopefully not a lot of voting power will go to that. So that's also one reason to have voting process disclosure as well. One thing that's I believe could really happen is, because we currently have no saturation limits, then this like very popular DRep could be a real problem. So again, like to actually disclose the interest of the proposer is going to be really important for especially the very larger DReps. So you as a delegator are able to judge wisely. Yeah. I think this problem of selling votes or voting power, this is something we did not fully get to tackle with the code of conduct, and we don't feel ready to tackle it with the code of conduct because the community has not really had this debate yet. Are we going to allow this or not? So for now, we have again said that you should definitely disclose your policy on this, but we have not taken a stance on this. Yeah, and just disclosing voting process will also help with informing you if you have any pattern in how you're voting as well. So you as a delegator can get to know that. I think that's all. We have not fully done all of the edit history. We need to add the current workshops. But this has been a work of quite many. And for Catalyst DRep, we currently have the same, but we believe we need to change this for the Catalyst as well, as we learn more about the Catalyst DRep. And we expect already that the Catalyst DRep will likely need to update their voting policy between each found round, for example, because Catalyst currently experiments a lot. So actually, even the voting method could be different from one Catalyst process to another. We already see examples of this. Yeah. I think that's all I wanted to present. And again, the goal of this workshop is to gather feedback if what we have is something that's sufficient to now try to test on SanchoNet and on mainnet as well. Anyone want to add something more, Thomas? Or?
Yeah. I don't have anything else to add. I do want to share a file, a link in the chat though. If anyone does have any feedback, either that they don't want to do vocally, or if they just want to take their time and post it anywhere, I've created a Google form that you can fill out. I shared the link in the chat here. So if you want to, if you want to take your own, if you want to take your time to create some feedback, please fill out that form. There's also the final question there. I just want to emphasize that is, if anyone is looking to host a DRep workshop and they want the material, want access to the material that we have, or access to, or want to talk to us, or whatever you want, fill out your email address so we can contact you. We will not use it for anything else. Yeah. Lily, you have your hand raised.
Hi, yeah, just a tiny question on something you touched on earlier, Einstein, just about the topic of buying votes. I thought that was interesting, and just wondering if there is a plan to go back to that and discuss that, if that's something that's sort of on the agenda to look more deeply into.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we deserve a wider community debate on this. It's been part of the workshops, some feedback on this, and even ideas how to make a market. But Nicholas Cherney is having this governance hours, and I already said to him, like, I would love to have this debate there. And I believe it should be wider than just a workshop on the code of conduct. It's actually something we as a community need to decide. Should we allow, and in what type of segment should we allow it? And again, as we said in the initial code of conduct, like we try to err on the side of freedom. There could be, for example, economic efficiencies in doing some form of incentivized voting behavior. So I'm trying to be neutral in it, and for now saying that this is something you should disclose your policy on. But we definitely welcome a debate on this, and we plan to have it as part of our workshop series as well, going forward in the Builder Fest and in London. And yeah, we don't feel we are done with this topic. So yes is the answer to that.
Thank you. Thanks.
See, Jose, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, so just a quick reflection and thoughts on, I just wanted to remind everyone that this document is not, I mean, it is an independent document and it stands in itself, but it is also part of a whole mechanism that will end up shaping the whole governance mechanism behavior and the people within. So rewards mechanisms, the constitution, which is still we have to draft and ratify the constitution, the technical tools, then the governance tools and the interactions that we have with those are going to be important and are going to be shaping all these behaviors. And we'll end up also probably modifying and providing a wider context from which new understandings will result in editing of this document going forward. So this is a live document. This is by no means something that should remain static in time. There's still a huge amount of input to be put there, both by other workshops and by changing circumstances ahead, such as the new constitution, for example, and the new tools that we have, and just more community getting engaged with this. So just wanted to give that perspective and also mention that there's a big difference between an ethical kind of conduct and a moral code of conduct. And we do not want to go into the second one because that is too subjective, depends on your belief system on your origins and your origin, your place of origin, the country you're of, your religion, your whatever. There's huge amount of diversity, and we want to keep that diversity within the system. So this, as Ashton has mentioned several times, we want to keep it as free as possible, and just provide a point of reference on what we understand what that would make the better system for us to take decisions on what Cardano should look like. Thanks.
Let's see. Darlington, you get your hand raised. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for this. This has been very informative. Love this one-page presentation. Yeah. The question I had was about the one of my interests in these conversations is my team is building a DRep campaign platform. So I'm very curious about the disclosures in the on-chain bit. If we're already having conversations around if there's a metadata or if it's part of the bigger metadata for stuff that goes on chain. Yeah, I know you talked about it a little bit. Where's the rest of that conversation happening? Is that in the purview of this code of conduct, or is that the working group thing, or
I'm really glad you bring this up, and I think this is really the next step for this, and I would like that to be part of a wider working group, not just owned by the original team. I tried to do there's something about eating your own pudding, so I actually tried yesterday to do a disclosure of myself as the DRep. So I simply made currently you can on SanchoNet make a text file and link to it, and for example on GitHub, and then use that with a hash and verify that that hash is correct to your file. I'm not sure you are aware of this. I'm just saying it to everyone else. But what I quickly realized is that we need some form of data standard for this, because if all of the tooling is going to read this effectively, then we need that standard. So I think we need to work together, the technical part of the community, with the people who are doing the social contract part of this, and come together. So I think a working group is the natural place for that. That's my answer to that. And I think we need to start on that now. We now have something that's fairly, let's say, it's usable to start experimenting with, like to actually try it on SanchoNet and try to do disclosures and try as a delegator to follow it. And then something that the tool makers can then analyze and look into and make sense, like what metadata items make sense and how do we structure this information. So that's my answer to that. And I clearly see it myself, just trying to practice it myself to disclosure that we need to have some standard on that.
Yeah, I know there is a metadata working group for 1694 in general. Yeah, it would be good to connect with some of those folks and start thinking about at least drafting something. Nothing is fixed in stone or permanent yet, but if we're drafting something, that gives people like myself and other people who are building governance tooling, I mean, even in places like Pool PM and all of the current visualizations we have on there, something tangible to start providing feedback on, maybe. Right. Cool. Thanks.
Let's get going on that, and let's try to have some DReps who will try to follow this and get some data on SanchoNet for that. Cool.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. That we're probably going to start working on it earlier than this, but we are doing a follow-up workshop at Builderfest, and with a bunch of developers there. So we're probably going to touch upon topics like this there, because the audience will be will be the target for something like this. So yeah, let's see, Siblim, you got your hand raised. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Good evening. I actually participated in the DRep workshop here in Ghana on January 27th, and I think it was so interactive. So, regards to Harden and then the team. Thank you. Basically, before my question, I want to just suggest that the DRep Code of Conduct should be part of the Pioneer program. Indeed, I've shown an interest in it in the registration, so that it will make potential directors more informed about the tasks that they are about to undertake. So there are only two questions. Because currently I'm currently running a program, onboarding people, trying to give them information about what DREPS is all about and then how they can get involved through our funded project. And then the questions which are arising from our first event was that after registering as a DREP,
He cut out for me.
this is one of the questions that was asked, and then I played to find out from the community and get back to them. The second was when will DREP fully be implemented in Cardano, either in the CPI or Project Catalyst? Thank you.
Sublim, can you repeat the first question, because it cut at one part of it, but I got the second question. Or did anyone else get the first question? He cut that one. No. But your second question, I can answer. Yeah, I mean, you can already implement this on SanchoNet, the testnet. You can also follow the timeline and the roadmap. I think Intersect has posted the roadmap in general for the rollout when we were doing the hard fork. But I think that's the moving targets. I don't want to comment on that. Maybe others in the team know about that when it's actually going live on mainnet, the Changhong fork. But I don't have that information. Yeah, okay, no one else does. But yeah, your first question, I didn't get that one. Go ahead if you want. Oh, maybe he has technical issues again. It's yeah. Let's see if he comes back. If not, I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just going to take some questions from the chat while we're waiting and seeing if he comes back. So Andreas asks, do we already have a GitHub repo for this DRep code of conduct, or is it already moved under Intersect GitHub account? Let's see, so we already touched upon that. We are working on getting it under the Intersect GitHub repo. If I'm not mistaken, yeah.
Yeah. So let me just add to this. Like, this is like we sometimes in Intersect, it's a membership-based organizations for Cardano. We sometimes discuss like what is internal to Intersect and what is external, and this is something for the whole Cardano community. So even if it's put on a Intersect GitHub repository, it should be freely available to everyone too. So we need to make sure that. So if it's some form of access to that, we will also make sure to add it to some other GitHub repository, as this should be the whole community debating it.
Yeah, for sure. To add to that, I think I would definitely like to take a look at that Google Drive and what's in there sooner rather than later.
Yeah, let's keep it. Let's talk, Darlington, after this on like getting the information and seeing where it fits to put this out. Like, we just want to have it somewhere available to the whole community.
I mean, the document could just be shared right now if you want. Just make sure it's comment or read only.
Let me drop the link, or I think it's already dropped the link there. Or I'll just drop it one more time just to...
There you go. Yeah, so that's the Google link. And yeah, like I said, we are working on getting it on on GitHub as well. So I guess that answered your question, Daniel. Yes, it is currently on Google Drive. Yeah, and so Mike says that there's lots of great information about governance metadata standards for DReps and governance actions, etc., in the SIP 100. So that's something to look at. Yeah.
Yeah, let me add to that. Like, I think there's many. We're working greatly on like how to present a proposal, but we don't really have a metadata standard yet, as far as I know, on how to disclose as a DRep, and that I think Darlington touched upon that. That's something we definitely should look into as well. Apart from that, like we had a lot of cool things from each workshop. So maybe we should end with that. Like, what was the key topic you felt from each workshop to end it on like a positive note and something to think about if you want to add feedback, because Thomas, you will provide a link, right, where they can send us more feedback if they want to consider after this video call as well. So
yeah, it's already in the chat.
I'll take my takeaway from the Norwegian workshop is Trim was one of the attendants there, discussed this like community notes. I think this is really interesting because we don't just want someone who to make a lot of claims about something and how to discuss it alone. We want to have a vivid discussion of all of the aspects and for and against. So some form of like community notes on this like anchors of metadata could be quite powerful, but that has to be done quite carefully. It should not be. It should be about encouraging as much knowledge and widely discovering the topic and all of the force and against. Not something that should generate conflict. So it should not be like to insinuate someone else is wrong in there or something like that, but just providing more information. So it's a form of community note that adds context. I think it could be really cool to look into as a tool on top of this.
Hey, I'll speak from the Indianapolis workshop perspective. I think one of the things that I found most interesting, positive, was talking about ways to make it relatively easy and beneficial for DReps to do the right thing. And that was just sort of creating a culture of that, you know? So like when we talked about like how people would have special interests, right? You know, like they would have like, maybe they're part of the DeFi Alliance. That's okay. You can have an interest in something and you can have a group that you say like, I really want to represent this group. Just be straightforward about it, right? Just tell people why you are in alignment with that cause or with that group. It's okay to be paid to be a DRep by someone if you're very straightforward about it and you say like, hey, you know, this I am a not like maybe not in the sense of vote buying, but more like in the sense of like, I'm representing this project. And so because I'm representing this project, you know, I'm an ambassador for them, so I get payment. So maybe people could say like, oh, well, if I realize now that you're receiving a financial incentive from that project, I recognize that unless my interests are aligned with you, I don't want to delegate to you. the key thing is that if you create this incentive for people to be open and disclosing it, it also makes it so that people will have a negative reaction on those who are secretive about it. Because there's like a lot of if you look at like sort of the legacy world, a lot of times people have connections and things that they're supposed to disclose that they don't, and the sort of what we say is like, oh well, nobody discloses that, right? We all know that there's a revolving door between politics and X in industry or whatever. And I don't. It's hard to unwind, but I think that the first step is just making it so that if you create a culture of being open and honest, it makes it so that everyone else is sort of a watchdog to enforce that culture. So that's sort of what I'm trying to cross.
Yeah, so maybe I'll go next. And one of the main things that we discussed in the same line of what Adam was just saying, and that is that the ultimate force driving the whole system will be support by their giving their trust and educate different behaviors that DReps could have to the community will end up hopefully reflecting in the community supporting the right behaviors. So that's probably the main force. And the other main force I already mentioned is the reward structure. So both the formal reward structure that we're still to know how it will end up being. We don't really know what the reward structure is going to be, but that rewards direct financial reward structure for DRep's work is going to be just part of the whole reward system. So there's going to be reputation, there's going to be private rewards financially, there's going to be, and ultimately the driving force of reputation is important, but mostly it's going to be about access to the treasury. There's going to be a huge pile of money there that anyone can have access to, and that huge pile of money is going to make it in a good investment to go out of your way to try to get a big bit out of that. So again, reward systems are very, very important, and we need to understand the behavioral economics behind what takes place. And the final piece is, of course, disclosure. Communicating the most about the DReps is going to be key, and not only communicating from like just voluntarily just communicating, but providing tools such as the campaigning platform that Darlington is building. If you provide the space there for key information to be there, then DReps might be compelled to provide that information, and if the space wasn't there, they might not. So there's going to be a huge, again, this is a complex system, and all the bits matter. That's what I have from this side.
Iko, you want to add something from the Ghana workshop, perhaps? Maybe he has the same internet problem as his fellow participant. Let's give it a little time. Okay, while we wait for Iko, I just want to end with like a bit humbleness. Like, this is the opinion and feedback from around 100 people. It's a tiny part of the Cardano community. We are passionate people on this, but it's important for this to have any value, and the resources and time we have put into it, that it's more widely available and that we actually put it into practice. So this is something I will try myself to try to use it in my SanchoNet testing of being a delegated representative. And I hope to collaborate more with others on this. And if anyone wants to host other workshop, like feel free to reach out to us, and we will help you with the material and what we got so far and our experience, and maybe help you to have a more efficient workshop yourself as well. And we will love feedback, so anyone is free to hold workshops and add to and comment on this. And we don't want to be the only maintainers of this. We want it to be part of the wider community. All right. And this is our closeout for the Catalyst. But we are not done with this. As we said, we have a series of other workshops now, and others in the community will as well. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here and for participating.
Yeah, thanks everyone. And yeah, I just wanted to mention that I shared the sign-up link for the upcoming workshop in London and also in Toulouse. There are limited seats for both of them, so I do believe there are about 5 free spots in London and about 10 free spots in Toulouse. And yeah, I also want to take the opportunity to say thanks to Cardano Foundation for sponsoring those events. This has been part of the Catalyst funded round. The next workshops are going to be funded by or sponsored by Cardano Foundation. So yeah, and with that, unless anyone has any questions, I think we can end this this workshop. And yeah, thanks everyone for showing up, and feel free to fill out the feedback form if you have anything to add.